Okay, so a little bit of progress on the 1979 Scout International restoration and motor swap. So the wiring harness got sort of plugged into the motor and run into the firewall, as well as the speed sensor adapter and speedometer cable has been installed, running up through the firewall. Here I have the hydro boost set up and the lines run to a T for the return line, back into the pump. I have the fittings installed onto the power line going back to the hydro boost, and the hydro boost pressure line as well going back forward into the OEM power steering pump. And then, like I said, a return line teed into a second return line from the hydro boost. Bled the master cylinder on the bench in the vise before I put it on final install, and then hooked up to the stainless line kit we have all the way to the distribution block, down to the front and rear brakes. The clutch master has been reinstalled with the line bent down and bled. Also have here custom battery cables got made up. So this is your power to the starter, and then it also runs around the firewall and then through underneath the fuel rail to the alternator bolt I have down here. So that is ready for the inner fender to go on pretty much and mount the battery. One more final detail before I put the inner fender on is I'm going to try to get the steering column painted so we can run the steering column Borgen U-joints, double U-joint here into the steering column hole, which will go through here. And this will all be installed before I put the front fender on so I can get easy access. So the Hydro Boost is hooked up underneath the dash here, just to the OEM linkage. So it goes up to a nice location, as well as I have the clutch set up. I'm just gonna run a clutch spring so it holds it all the way to the top always. Also have installed the ground kit. So there's a ground strap here connecting both of the heads. Then the ground strap goes to the bell housing, and then the ground strap also goes to the firewall. So right here we have the ground strap going to the firewall, and then a third ground strap, or fourth one, it's going from the block here to the frame. So if you look on the underside of the frame, you can see the mount there. And then when the battery's installed, we'll be running a ground from the battery negative to the frame again. And that's pretty much it for the 1979 Scout. I have some grommets that will be going in, and the steering column stuff. We got some motor oil, as we'll be putting it in the motor pretty soon. We chatted about a hood latch cable being broken. So I picked up a Dorman kind of universal cable, utility cable, and this has the correct ends that should be able to mount in the OEM spot and hook to the hood latch. In the conversion harness box, we have the mass airflow sensor that will be getting hooked into the intake. We have the gas pedal left to install, and then finally is the computer at the bottom, and then we have a PSI bracket for the harness that's already in the car, and we'll mount that to the inside of the firewall. Okay, so just a little bit of paint stripping on the hood today, and then light sandblast around the perimeter, and then over any rust. Looks like we have a couple of holes all the way through the top side of the hood that were bonded up. The small one in the corner here. We have a bigger one in the back corner. Hood pins to weld up still, and then right in the center of the hood, in the back, is another really rusty spot and a hole all the way through. But otherwise, it's been blasted. The perimeter sanded 100 grit, so this is all shiny bare metal. And then the underside, the perimeter has gotten sandblasted to make sure there's no major rust. And the underside will be getting touched up, as we don't want to warp the top side of the hood while we're working on the underside, so it did not get sandblasted. Okay, just back on the 1979 Scout International here. Got the entire body and primer this month, and got the wiring harness installed. Just finishing up some plastic sheathing over it. The front end has a piece from headlight to headlight going through into the engine bay. Got a bunch of battery posts, fan relay, and then an inline fuse here, which will go to the main fuse box. I have the wires running through the engine bay here in loom as well. This is more of a fabric loom. This is just one set going through the firewall here, as well as I got the other wires on the other side of the firewall to loom into the engine loom, as well as down through the trans tunnel and to the back. Over by the heater box, I have the wiper motor fan plug going through the original hole and then down into the firewall. On the passenger side here, I've got the wiring going through the center console here for the speakers left and right, as well as a red hot wire running to the seats, and that is as well wired to its own relay for the seat power, and that runs off a wire that's running off the battery. And I have the computer for the LS all wired in, so the tach, oil pressure, engine light, and all that, as well as the fuel pump is wired in. And then I just have to plug in the computer here. Oops. Plug in the computer here and find a mounting spot. These two wires, the black one's for ground for the door jamb switch, which I've ordered up the door jamb switches for here. And then the white wire will be feeding the courtesy light that will get mounted under the dash and shoot into the footwell here. One on the driver's side and one on the passenger side. Going over to the driver's side now. The harness is pretty much ready to test. There's a little bit of a testing going on with the headlight switch. So I have the wires a bit long and the switch out here still. But the wiper switch is wired in here. It seemed to be pretty straightforward. It looks like that switch maybe need to be replaced, as I noticed when I wired it, it had a different switch for the wiper fluid. So we got wiper fluid here, but wiper blades here. So that's a little bit aftermarket setup that this Scout has. Going into the dash here, the wires are all plumbed up here to plug into the dash. The plugs are all pretty straightforward. And I have a big ground wire here for the grounds. Couple wires are individual, are labeled 4x4 light. So that engages when your 4x4 is on, as well as a wire directly from the computer, which is a check engine light. So I've wired that into a direct bulb that was already placed on the dash. The stereo has been wired in now, as I mentioned. So we got the front speakers were not running, so I capped those off, but we have the rear speakers wired in, as well as the two hots into the main harness. So taking a look at the back now, I have the harness ran right through the back, and the pigtail ends for the marker lights wired in, as well as the ends to clip in the tail lights, as well as one label for the license plate light, which will be running a wire, drilling a hole here, coming out, going through this grommet, and going into the license plate hole, which is then accessed back here. And on the passenger side again, the wires are here, all wired in, and for the taillights, reverse lights, and the marker light, and I've loomed it, as well as I have installed a nice ground. Going over to the dash briefly, stereo bezel is in place, as well as the 8,000 RPM tach has been installed. And that was pretty straightforward as it plugged directly into the other tach that was already set up. So here we have the taillights that still need to be restored. I have new ends going in. Here they are here. These ends have already been fit to the taillights. So you can see how the blue ends will clip in nicely to the taillights. I have a signal light here that still needs to be restored. You can see the ends have all been corroded. And if you look close, there's actually been a join here, there and there. And it's getting pretty sloppy. This taillight I have taken the moment to restore just to make sure the ends I purchased worked. So new end going through here, grommet going into here, as well as two ends that go into the bulb. So we got fresh contacts for the bulb, just like these, fresh contacts. And that's pretty much it. Battery tray, just need to throw a light coat of paint on so I can get the battery in, test fit that. The wiper motor is here. I've been checking in on that. Again, the hood and doors. So as far as the fluid check, I just put 2 gallons in the rad to top it up. Probably need a bit more when we finally get to running, as well as I put 5 gallons, I believe. No, a full 4 liters into the engine to get the engine oil up to the right level to then start turning it over. I got some heat shielding coming for a couple wires that are going behind the header down to the starter. Generally those wires get a little bit close to the header, so I'm gonna run a heat shield on those wires. Other than that, that is everything for the 1979 Scout progress report.